So we just notified that I can't live in a tiny house here and off grid. So let me give you a little history, then a little explanation what's going on. So as you know, 3 years ago we moved here from experiencing the nomadic lifestyle. We were traveling the country in a truck camper that we built. We came down here, bought this property for $4,200 from a guy, paid cash for it. Went to the title company, exchanged the title for the cash. A month later, we moved here. We went to Mom's house, I think in February of that year. Got all our supplies together, got the well pump and the solar panels and just different things. Came down here, took the truck camper off, the homemade truck camper off the back of the truck. And we stayed in it while we built the tiny house. We had to build a little outdoor heat exchanger using an old Franklin wood stove. Used a ton of wood, but it kept us warm. So I spent several months building that. I have a whole playlist on it. You can go to my channel, go to playlist. You can see the tiny house build. And I built it all by myself. Carolyn helped me raise the north wall. And then I regretted that she did that. And then she also helped me assemble that plastic shower. It says you can do it by yourself in the instructions. People in the comment section said you could do it by yourself, but I was unable to, so she helped me with that. But the rest of it I built entirely by myself. Every sheet, every board, everything I did. So we moved in that winter, so that was 1 year, almost 1 year after we came to the property that we moved in that place. And we had to move in it pretty quickly because we had this huge winter storm coming. And it got down to negative, well, into the negatives for several days, maybe even a couple of weeks. So that first year, the water tank, the plumbing, all that froze up almost instantly after we moved in. But the last 2 years, we haven't had a water issue at all. It froze for a couple of days this last winter, but it got down to -6. And we found out -4 is our limit. But all in all, everything went really well. We got that wood stove. We used less than a quart of wood. We have all these solar panels here. And I've just spent a bunch of time relocating this, and I showed you how to install them. I have a subscriber who says they're moving into a tiny house and solar panels, and they really appreciated me going through the effort of doing that. Well, of course, it was kind of fun for me. And then we have the chickens. Chickens are important. They provide at least half of our food, if not more, with the eggs, because we're carnivores, so that's all we eat is meat and eggs, cheese. The thing about moving here in Missouri was there was no codes, at least in the southern-western portions of the state. There just wasn't any codes that you really had to follow. When you started getting down to shed lot sizes, we looked at a lot of states before we moved here. We looked at Texas and Mississippi. Mississippi is where I really wanted to go. I wanted to be by the Gulf Coast. Now you hear me say I wanted to go to Mississippi. But you don't see me in Mississippi, you see me in Missouri. Now Missouri is my home state. Born and raised here. I've only spent a few years away from this state. Well, I was in the Navy. I went on a sabbatical to Iowa for a while. Oklahoma, I was there for a while. I'm trying to remember where else I was. So, and then we traveled the country for 3 years. So, come back to Missouri. And when we were doing our research, Missouri just seemed like the place to be. It was kind of incredible. Now, I've never been this far west, southwest, I should say, into Missouri. It's almost like a different environment here than where I was raised. I was raised in about central Missouri and eastern Missouri, just south of St. Louis. So when I come here, people really don't care what you're doing, especially in this community. There's a house falling down there that he lives in. No one says a word. I remember when we tried to get an address here. I can't remember exactly how I put it. I called the sheriff's office because that's where you get the addresses from, the 911 call center. And I said, I bought this old rundown place I want to get an address here. And he says, yeah, I'm sure it's run down. So he implied, obviously, that this area is just run down. I don't see the problem with that. To me, that's important because nobody's going to bother you. I remember when we were building this tiny house, the neighbor up there had a little dispute about how close the original mobile home was to his property. It did not meet this code. You had to be so many feet away from his property line. And he was worried we were going to build our house near his property line. Of course, we didn't. We were way far away from it, I don't know, 20 feet away, which was within the specifications. Once he realized what we were doing, it became a friendlier conversation, and he says, well, you don't be bringing any HOAs around here. And he lives up here right on the main road. I'm not going to give him specifics because people will try to find me. But he's got a junkyard out front, right there on the main road, a metal scrap pile, firewood laying all over the place, not even stacked, just laying. It's quite the catastrophe over there. And he has a lot of friendly people, you know, visiting him all the time. So I guess he's pretty friendly. And nobody complains about that. Nobody complains about any of this. Our neighbor over here never has cut the grass since they moved in, not once. They attempted to, and their lawnmower died. But they didn't get it finished. That was this year. I don't hear anybody complaining about it. If nobody's complaining about it, you know, having a tiny house here on solar panels should not be an issue here. That's why we picked this place. Like I said, I wanted to go to Mississippi. I really did. Mississippi was just being by the Gulf Coast. But the problem with Mississippi was they took a bailout from the federal government from a hurricane they had years ago. And the federal government required that they had specified certain codes. Now, when I said this in a video that I wasn't going to go to Mississippi because of these codes, people said, nobody ever pays attention to these codes anymore. Don't worry about it. You can come down here. They're not going to bother you. Well, that's all well and good, unless you upset somebody. You got to remember, I'm on YouTube, so I tend to upset a lot of people. I get called in all the time. When we started building this tiny house, we got called in. Somebody in, Tennessee and California called us in. And that's how I knew that I was building the house to code. Without code, I should say. My thought was it was under 200 square feet, and the code book specified that. The code inspector said it was being built on a trailer frame, so it was just a remodel. Either way, it didn't matter to me. I didn't have to follow code. But if I were down in Mississippi, if you think about it, and I was building a house against code, or whatever you want to call it, like I was told to in the comment section, somebody turned me in. Of course, the commissioner comes out, inspects you, and then you're in serious trouble, and now you got all this money tied up in a piece of property you can't use. Now I know people are going to say, well, you should just build it to code. The nice thing was I didn't have to spend the money that is required to bring the house up to code. First thing is you got to have it like 400 square feet, so that's double the cost. And then everything's more costly. You had to have plumbing, and a lot of people are telling me, which I found out is not true. The code inspector actually called me the other day, or I called him. He wrote me and told me to call him. But people think my well is not the code, and I need to redo that. So imagine I go down to Mississippi, and all this is true, and I have to do all that. And then, so what is turned out to be about $10,000 with the property and the house would have turned into a $100,000 project. Well, I don't have that kind of money. It's designed for rich people. That's what this is. In my area here, it's designed for poor people. And so if you accept that you're either poor or you don't want to spend a lot of money, and you go to a poor area, then you can be happy. And that's the whole point of my channel, is living your dream, being happy, doing what you want to be able to do. I mean, if you're happy in an HOA, then that's your dream. That's where you want to be. There's nothing wrong with that. People come to my channel all the time. I want to do this and I want to do that. Well, then do that. You don't do this. What it is they see aspects of my life that they like, that they want to integrate into an HOA. No, you got to follow the rules. I'm following the rules to this area, and the rules to this area is there's no rules. But you got to accept that. And you got to accept that your neighbors don't have any rules either, And that's where I think the downfall is. People are hypocrites. I had a neighbor one time turn me in for everything. I had a fenced-in yard, chicken wire, and I would let my dogs out. Now, I never let my dogs out on their own. They were always supervised. And of course, they'd go to the bathroom in my backyard. And about once a week, the family would get together and clean up the backyard. We had these scoopers that we picked everything up with. And it was a good chore for my daughter to get filled into as well. So she got paid to do it and taught her responsibility. But we all took turns, or we go out as family and we clean it up. And my neighbor turned us in to the town council. Well, it was a small town council, they didn't care. But he did that all the time. He turned you in for everything, called the police for everything. I remember one time we was out in the backyard with a telescope, and I was able to hook up a black and white TV to the telescope. It had this little thing that I could put in there on the lens. And he called the police, said there's strange lights in the backyard. He just didn't want any of that. Now, on the other hand, he had a dog, ran loose all the time. He'd let it go in the middle of the night. I actually stayed up one night to catch him. He'd let it run loose. He'd come into our yard, go to the bathroom in the front yard. I mean, our dogs were going to the bathroom in the backyard at least. Dog vomited on our porch one time. So it was okay for him, but not for us. So there was a double standard, a hypocrisy, that he wanted us to follow his rules as long as he didn't have to follow those rules. So I get a comment today, and I wanted to address the comment. It said, I want to live off-grid in a tiny house just like you, and I want to do it in an area that we like. But the areas we like won't let us because codes, and she listed all the reasonings. I think it was a she. And I replied back, you can either live off-grid or you can live in these areas that have all the codes. Here's the thing, just like my neighbor, there are a lot of people who want the expectations lowered, the standards lowered for them, so they can live the way they want to. But I can guarantee you, if their neighbors didn't cut grass, they would be calling it in. You can't have both. Either you want to live in a rich area where you have these restrictions, which it's obvious, that's what she wants. If she wants to live in an area that has restrictions, well, the reason it has restrictions is because she enjoys those restrictions. She just doesn't want those restrictions applied to her. I don't want my neighbor's yard trashed, but it's okay for me. So you're going to live off grid. Now, admittedly, I know my yard isn't appealing to a lot of people. I get a lot of trolls cussing me out. You need to clean this yard up. Maybe. On the other hand, I can just leave it the way it is and nobody cares. This yard looks a lot better than it did a long time ago. And there's a lot of yards around here that looks worse than mine. So I'm not overly worried about what the trolls think. In order to have solar panels laying on the ground, I got to live in an area that allows me to have solar panels laying on the ground. I don't have this expectation that I should be able to go to a rich neighborhood in the suburbs of St. Louis and hook up a solar panel and then put an old camper here so I can live in it until I can get it torn down, put a shed out here, put electronics in there, a generator with gasoline, and then Carolyn's son wants to come stay here, so we get a camper and just park it in the middle of the yard. And of course, our chicken run is horrendous looking, so we wouldn't be able to do that. But my expectation is they should let me do it because I want to raise chickens. You have to know what you want, and you can't expect both things to happen. Either you're going to live in the suburbs of some beautiful city with lots of restrictions, because that's where everybody wants to live. They want to live in a rich neighborhood. Or you want to live poor. I'm not saying you are poor, I'm just saying you want to live poor. So you have to go to a poor neighborhood where everybody's poor. And people just don't want to admit it. People don't want to admit, let's say you are poor. You don't want to admit that you're poor. You want to put on this facade that you're rich. So you buy the fancy cars that you can't afford. You buy the fancy houses that you can't afford. And then when you've decided, well, I just can't afford this anymore, so I want move out my fancy house and park a tiny house here, some chickens and solar panels, and people better will accept it. Just can't have it both ways. And I don't know why I get so many comments that say this. It should be fairly obvious that you can't have both. You either live off grid, live happy, live free, or you live in a town where you're miserable and you're not free. Whatever you want, but you can't have both. So if you'll click this up next box, take it to a video where I was talking about I caught Carolyn's stalker. So I hope I can inspire you to really find out what your dream is so you can live it. Thanks for watching.